and welcome back to another solo episode of Legacy Her Way, the podcast where we explore how women are creating powerful personal legacies through family, faith, business, community, and beyond. I'm Tanya Hendricks, your host of Legacy Her Way, and this episode is sponsored by Huntsville Estate Planning Lawyer, where we empower your vision and secure your future through estate planning and trademarks. So this podcast features foster moms, founders, creatives, caregivers, because we go beyond, and in this podcast, we go beyond the buzzwords and we talk about the real life, our real lives, the real impact that we can have and that we are having, and the values that guide it all. Now, whether you're building wealth or raising kids or you're launching your next big thing, this space is for you. Now, as your host and on this solo episode, I talk about legacy, and if you've listened to some of my other podcasts, I did talk about my work with the human trafficking victims, and I've been asked to talk a little bit more about that. People are always intrigued when they hear about my work with trafficking victims. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today on this episode of Legacy Her Way. And I want to talk about not just my work with the victims, but I want to talk about trafficking kind of in general. Because again, people are fascinated by it. I say fascinated, it's kind of we're concerned about it. It's something we don't really know. I think a lot of people have a pull to help these victims. We have a heart for helping these victims. And certainly there is a lot that needs to be done. So the victims certainly need help. They need resources. Agencies who are helping victims need resources. And there are so many agencies now. It's funny because when I first started working with trafficking victims back in 2009, there weren't that many who were talking about domestic minor sex trafficking. And there were a lot of organizations who were helping victims in other countries because, we were thinking, well, it's a problem they have over in Thailand. It's a problem they have in Vietnam or other Asian countries or in Europe. We were not looking at the victims here in the United States. And it's surprising when I worked with victims and I worked with agencies that help victims and I did a lot of speaking engagements, people were always shocked to find out that the majority of victims that I personally interacted with were Americans. People assume that trafficking victims in the United States are brought here from other countries, and there are those as well. But people were always shocked to find out the majority of the victims I worked with are American citizens, are young girls and boys who were trafficked from their homes, or they ran away from their home in Alabama, or they ran away from their home in Georgia or Mississippi or Tennessee or Florida and ended up being prostituted. So I want to talk a little bit more about that because I do want people to know, I want you as the listener to know what trafficking really looks like. We have a perception, or at least we did in general, we had a perception that it is, again, the victims are from other countries. They're brought here for this purpose, and that the buyers of sex with these victims are probably scum of the earth type people. They are scum of the earth, but they may be of a lower socioeconomic status. They may not be the pillars of the community. Those things, those assumptions could not be further from the truth. I think we're probably waking up to that with all the talk about Epstein, because that did bring so much attention to the fact that there are some very powerful people in high positions, very wealthy people who are the buyers, or what we would call a John, or sometimes a trick. That's so some of the terms within that area is what they would be called. And I think we're realizing that is a possibility, that there are people of higher net worth, of higher socioeconomic status, of positions of trust and privilege within the community who are in fact, the Johns out there who are buying sex. And I can attest from my own work with victims, many of the Johns, and when I say Johns, I just want to make clear, because I'm going to, there's a certain language that goes with this activity. I mean, I'm struggling to find the exact terminology to say. So I want to just touch on that because I'm going to be using these terms. I just want you to know what I'm talking about. So when I say something, if I say they're in the life, L-I-F-E, life, that is the term that a lot of victims use for discussing and talking about being prostituted, being trafficked, being in that lifestyle. So it's called the life. The person who buys the services from them, pays for the services, they could be called a John, they could be called a Trick. There's probably a lot of other names out there, but those are the two that I will be referencing. And then I'm going to use trafficker and pimp interchangeably because they're one and the same. I mean, when you're working with trafficking agencies and working with trafficking victims, there are some different levels to it. I mean, you got the street level pimp, and then you have the big level trafficker who's kind of overseeing an entire organization, maybe a high profile. So there are some differences, but I'm going to use those terms interchangeably because essentially it comes down to, this is the person who is using, forcing, coercing, manipulating, whatever it may be. They're the ones who are prostituting this young woman or this young man. They're the ones who are benefiting from the abuse that the body of that young woman or that young man is taking. One of the things that frustrated me, if you listen to my episode, I think it was the first episode of the podcast, one of the things that frustrated me and angered me so much was thinking about the young woman I just met on the street, and it was her body taking the abuse. It was her body being subjected to the abuse so that somebody else can make the money. And that's the way it works. The person who is making the money is not the one whose body is being subjected to abuse. They're not the one who's being raped. They're not the one who's being sodomized. I don't mince words. Let me just come back. I don't mince words. I've been talking about these issues since I was in college. When I was a freshman in college, I joined a group where we talked about, and it was a advocacy group, an educational group to help educate women at the University of Alabama campus about dating violence, sexual assault, and domestic violence. So I've been a prosecutor of child sex cases. I've been a prosecutor of domestic violence. I just use the terms. So I'm accustomed to it. I don't want it to come off as harsh to you as you're listening to this, but it is what it is. So it is the rape of these young women, of these young boys. It's the sodomy of these young boys and these young girls and young women that just angers me. Even taking the money part out of it, it's somebody else who's making them do that. Whether it's through force, whether it's through coercion, manipulation. Back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, when I was really in the heart of helping trafficking victims, we were still dealing with journalists, newspapers, police officers calling a 16-year-old a prostitute. A 16-year-old can't make the decision to sell her body. She's being prostituted. She may have ran away from home, but when she ran away from home, she wasn't running away from home so she could become, a prostitute. And when I talk about this, so I'm not going to paint a rosy picture. These young women, these young men have to perform so many services per night. I mean, they have quotas they have to meet. If they don't meet those quotas, they could be beaten, possibly end up dead. I mean, there are consequences to not meeting those quotas. The last time I spoke specifically with a victim about her quota, it was 20 a night, 20 services a night. So when I'm talking about these young women, these young men being prostituted, I'm not talking about a one night thing or one rape per night. We're talking multiple rapes, multiple sodomies per night that's happening to these young people and these young women, these young men, young adults. So I want you to have that picture and understand that's the reality of what they're living with. That's the reality of their lives. Now, if you, and I did, so I spoke with a lot of victims. I spoke with a lot of young women who were out off the streets. The dynamics are very different than what you would expect. You know, oftentimes we as the volunteers, we go in thinking we're the saviors. We're thinking that we're saving this person from a horrible life. And we are. I mean, we were. I mean, we were absolutely helping them get out of a terrible situation that no one should ever be in. But the problem that I found, and the issue that, not really problem, but the issue that I found was many of those young women didn't see us as saviors. They didn't see us as helping them in such a sense, because many of them have an attachment to their trafficker. They have an attachment to their pimp. Because that person has often saved them and saved their lives more often than we can count. Life on the streets is dangerous. And having a pimp or having a trafficker, or having somebody there who's watching your back, that provides them a sense of some security when they are out there doing what they have to do. So they have an attachment to that person. If you've ever heard of the Stockholm Syndrome, it's very similar to that, because they form a bond. This person may be the same person who beats me with a 2x4, or beats me with a clothes hanger, or beats me with a belt, whatever, or pistol butt, whatever it may be. But that's also the person that just saved me from that creep that tried to kill me. So there's this, and it's also the same person who puts a roof over their head and gives them food and gives them clothes. So there is a bond that's attached. And so when we're going in, or when I went in as someone who would literally try to get them off the streets, and did sometimes, and transport them to safety, to a safe house, I wasn't always viewed as a savior, and I shouldn't have been. I'm not a savior. But I was just some goody two-shoes showing up to help out a little bit and give them a safe place for a night or two. They were, not to say they were not appreciative, they were so appreciative of being out of that situation. But the reality is, a lot of them would go back. A lot of them went back because of that bond, because they have a bond with that person. You know, when I was working with these victims, it was heartbreaking to hear their stories. Many of the victims that I personally worked with ran away from home because they were in a horrible life, they had a horrible life at home. And so they ran away because the streets had to be better than what they had at home. I did have a few who were straight up abducted off the streets. I mean, they were just walking down the street, minding their business, and they got abducted. I had some who were placed into homes because they were kicked out of their own home with their own parents. And so people took them in to give them a place to live, and then they realize that there's nothing free in life. And so those people that took them in and created that mom and dad atmosphere and created that relationship with them ended up turning them out to be prostituted, or for their friends to take advantage of them, for their friends to come in and rape them. I mean, that's the reality of some of these people. Some of these victims became victims because they went looking for a job. There was a promise of a modeling career. And then the modeling career, or that job they went on the interview for, turned out to be someone shooting porn or using that as bait to get some nude photos of them, so then they could then blackmail them and turn them out as prostitutes. There are a lot of reasons that people became victims. Some of them fell in love. One of the common ways for someone to become a victim was that they were what's called love bombed. So they're recruiters. So a lot of pimps, traffickers, they have recruiters. And the recruiters are just out there looking for victims. And they can pinpoint vulnerabilities in somebody. And that's what they're looking for. So they see a young woman who may be out with her friends. She's getting ignored by the others. This recruiter will pick up on that and go and start flattering her, start telling her how pretty she is, how she should be treated better by her friends, starts pouring all the love and affection and money to gain that young woman's affection, gain her attention. And then that person, that recruiter, will get in between not only her and her friends, but also her and her parents. And it won't take very long for that recruiter to then turn around and rape her, have his friends rape her, or the recruiter could be a female too. So I don't want to pass up the opportunity to say there are female recruiters out there. But the recruiter will have friends rape her, and then next thing you know, that young woman is now being prostituted and doing what her now quote-unquote boyfriend wants her to do. There are numerous cases of a young woman traveling across country with her quote-unquote boyfriend because they wanted to be together forever and ever, but they had to get away from parents, and somehow they had to make money, and her body was the way to make money. And so that's what she believed she had to do in order for them to be together. I flew to just outside of San Francisco one year to pick someone up, a young teenager. And that was the very scenario, was that she had a boyfriend who they wanted to be together forever and ever. And the boyfriend's like, hey, we can go cross country, but oh man, I need some gas money. Or we've got to get a hotel room. I don't have enough money for that. I don't have enough money for us to stop and get something to eat. So, hey, baby, why don't you just go over there and, let this person do whatever. And that's the way it happened. It's that easy. It is simply that easy for somebody to become a victim. And for a teenager from Alabama to end up in California and having been prostituted in every state along the way. It's that easy. And now, with all the apps, a lot of victims are becoming victims because they are meeting people on some of these apps that, the messages disappear when you send the message, or they're getting in some of the games where you have live people. Some of these gaming, I don't even know, the online games where you have, you're competing with live people. And so you'll have some of the recruiters in that. You'll have recruiters in high schools. Some of the recruiters are going into high schools to recruit young women in various ways. It could be young men too. So they could invite this young person over to the party where all the popular people are, then force her to have sex, or have her, or she could be raped, and they film it and they use that as blackmail. I mean, there are so many ways that people become victims. We don't talk enough about those. The public perception, as I mentioned earlier, the public perception is a lot of the victims are coming here from other countries, and that does happen. One of the last young women I worked with as a victim was brought here from another country. She was brought in illegally. She was smuggled in for this purpose. So it does happen, but we can't overlook the fact that it's our American young men and young women who are becoming the victims of trafficking. Not only here, but they're being sent to other countries now. We're now sending a lot of victims to other countries. We're not just bringing people in. So I hope this has given you some sort of a sense of what, and I've just kind of rambled, but I hope this gives you a little bit of an idea of what their lives are really like and how people become victims and how easy it is and the psychology behind it. I'll never forget, I had a young woman. She was like 12 or 13 years old, and her biological dad, I want to say it that way because one of the terms I didn't talk about is daddy. So pimps are often called daddy. And so I have to make it very clear when I'm talking about the biological dad. The biological dad asked his daughter to do him a favor. And she was like, well, sure, Dad, of course I'll do you a favor. She didn't realize the favor was for her to have sex with his friends. When she was able to receive help and get out of that, get away from that, she believed wholeheartedly that she was the one at fault, that her dad did nothing wrong because she agreed to help him out. She agreed to do that favor for him and help him out. So in her mind, how could dad get in trouble? Why should dad get in trouble when she agreed to do it? And when you work with victims, they will often say that the person who was their pimp or their trafficker shouldn't get in trouble because they agreed to do it. People often say, well, why doesn't she just run away? Why does it, when the women would come to the safe house, many of them went back out on the street. So they went back to their trafficker or back to their quote unquote family who was the one pimping them out or prostituting them out. That life is something they know and they're comfortable with. They know how to navigate and survive in that world. They don't oftentimes know how to navigate and survive in our world. So someone who was first prostituted at the age of 14, has been on the streets till she was 14. She's 19, 20 years old now. Do you honestly expect that she's going to be able to go out, get a job, a legit job? She doesn't know how to navigate that world. She's grown up on the street. She's got survival skills that you and I will never understand or never know. These young women know how to survive in the most horrible situations. But many of them don't have a driver's license. They don't have a GED. They don't have a high school diploma. They don't even know how to get a driver's license. They don't know how to do certain things. They don't know how to fill out a job application. They've never had to do any of those things. And so we can't say to them when they turn 19, well, you're an adult now, so you can just do what you want to do. You can leave him. It's just not that easy. They know how to survive in that world. And so for those of you who are Christians, or even you don't have to be a Christian the Judeo-Christian faith. If you have a Jewish background, you understand the Exodus, and you understand how those Jewish people got to a point where they were looking at the massive river in front of them and Pharaoh's army behind them, and they thought, oh, we're going to die. We're going to die in this. We want to go back to slavery. We're going to go back to what we knew, what was comfortable. We at least were getting some food there. We at least had shelter there. It may have been horrible, but at least we had that. I see that happening a lot with victims. They are stuck in between two worlds, and the world that we want them to be in, where they are thriving in a legitimate job. They're not being raped every night for 15, 20 times a night. They're not living that lifestyle. That's something that's foreign to them. They don't know that. They know that other world. They know how to survive in that other world. And I think that's just critical for us to understand. And going back to what I said earlier about the Stockholm Syndrome, these young women and young men have someone who has been protecting them. It was warped, but they were protecting them. And so they feel a connection to that person. So it's extremely hard for the victims to leave. It's extremely hard for them to get out of it completely because of those strings, because of that connection, and because of that fear of this unknown world where you get a job making minimum wage, working at a gas station, and you still can't pay the bills. One young woman I talked to, that was her exact scenario. She had children she was supporting. She was supporting her sister's children. And the legit job she had at the gas station that paid her minimum wage was not enough to cover all the bills. And she was still getting all the government assistance as well, but it wasn't enough to keep food on the table and a roof over the head of all the children, of her children, her sister's children. And so her only other option was to sell her body. And that's a shame. And that's an indictment on our society that was her only option. One of the things I learned working with victims, and I credit this to the founder of the Well House, Tawana McCarty, she would often say, and she was a survivor, she would often say a woman is not going to enter into this world and become a prostitute, be prostituted on her own if she is whole spiritually, physically, psychologically, and financially. And I found that to be true time and time again. Now, I'm not saying there's not a single person in the world who has not said, yes, I want to be this. I want to be a prostitute. I want to be an escort. I want to do these things. There are certainly women who have made that decision. But what I have found in the women I have worked with, time and again, one of those things was lacking. Either financial security, they weren't whole financially, physically, psychologically, or spiritually. Those needs were not being met. So this is how that's how she was vulnerable. Or that's one of those things that was missing, is kind of what ended up causing her to be prostituted, to be trafficked. I no longer work directly with victims. I haven't worked directly with victims for a number of years, but they still hold a special place in my heart. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see some paintings behind me that were painted by victims. I've got a cross back here that was given to me by a victim. I have a bracelet that has a little R on it. That's not my initial, but R is redeemed. This was made and given to me by a victim, a survivor. But she didn't want to be called a survivor. She wanted to be called redeemed, that she had been redeemed from that situation. She was now whole. Not just surviving, she was thriving, and she was whole after her ordeal. These women will never leave my heart. They'll never leave my mind. There's still so many of them I worked with. I can see their faces. There's so many of them who I worked with that I'd wonder what happened to them. One young woman who I had to take to the hospital a couple of times. and heard her say, Miss Tanya, I don't want to die. Miss Tanya, I want to have children in the future. The last conversation I had with her seemed to be her telling me goodbye. She called me out of the blue, and it seemed to be a goodbye phone call. You know how you get those? You just sense that something's just not right.
Copy.
Many of these trafficking victims, many of these young women, young men, will die in some manner related to their victimization. It's an unfortunate, very unfortunate reality for them. And so when that phone call, when she called me that night, and I can still see myself sitting on the couch, talking to her and realizing this was her telling me goodbye. Whether it was a goodbye that I know I'm about to be killed, or it was a goodbye was I can never talk to you again. I don't know which one. And that's the haunting part of it. That's the haunting part of working with victims and never talking to them again. You don't know where they're at. You don't know if they ever really got out. You don't know if they're sitting in a prison somewhere. You don't know if they're deceased. And that's a hard thing to come to grips with, is not knowing what's happened to them when you poured your heart and soul into them and you wanted them so badly to realize how precious, how beautiful, how incredible and strong each one of them are. And if any of them that I've worked with happens to listen to this podcast, I hope they know, and they do know. I mean, many of them I have talked to since over the years, I have talked to them occasionally, and they know I love them. They know I'll always love them. But I want them to know just how much I admire their grit, their determination to live and survive. And I think that's something we can all admire them for, is that they do have the ability to survive, which means that they can survive in the life, they can survive outside of the life. And I do hope that many of those women I've worked with have done just that. I hope that they've been able to break free and get out of that. So part of my legacy that I don't want to say I'm proud of, but I am, is having worked with these victims. It's having had the opportunity to advocate for them. I can tell you, back in 2009, when I first started working with sex trafficking victims, no one believed that we had a problem. I talked with police officers. I talked with law enforcement officials, prosecutors, all the way up to the Attorney General's office, up to the State Attorney General. I talked with federal prosecutors, U.S. attorneys, and was told time and time again, Tanya, we don't have a problem in Alabama. We don't have a problem in Alabama. Well, it's funny because one of the victims I worked when I transported to the safe house, she was like, oh yeah, everybody comes to Alabama. There's a ton of money to be made in Alabama. People find money for their vices. They may not be able to find money to put food on the table for kids, but they will find money for their vices. And this was one of those things. And it was kind of eye-opening when she told me that. I was like, because I was like, have you been to Alabama? She's like, oh yeah, I've been to Alabama. We all go through Alabama. There's a lot of money to be made in Alabama. So for law enforcement officials back then to tell me, we don't have a problem, it was very frustrating. I'm excited to see that through a lot of education, through a lot of people banging the drum saying there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem, and people and law enforcement and prosecutors getting educated on the issue of human trafficking, that Alabama has come a long way. We have a lot of prosecutions now for human trafficking. We have a lot of awareness of human trafficking. You can stop in restrooms on the interstate and you see signs about human trafficking. So people through the years have just done a tremendous job. And I know I was a small part of that. And so I'm appreciative of that. As frustrating it was for me back then when nobody was listening, and I was saying, we got a problem, but nobody was listening. I'm glad that they finally started listening. They finally started listening to somebody and realizing, oh, we do have a problem. We do have victims we need to help. We do have to set this thing straight. We do have to set the oppressed free. When I used to do a lot of speaking on this topic, there is a quote that I always like to refer back to, and it's a statement made by the U.S. State Department in a 2010 report about human trafficking. And the statement is, prostitution is not the oldest profession, it's the oldest form of oppression. That's so true. And as our eyes are now open to the issue of domestic sex trafficking and domestic minor sex trafficking, we stand in a position now in 2025 where we can set the oppressed free, where we can intervene and help victims. That intervention may be working with the Johns. If we can stop demand, you can stop supply. So if you want to get involved with the anti-human trafficking movement, maybe start working on the demand side. Raise your boys to respect women. Make sure your sons, your husbands, your brothers, your fathers don't engage in this activity. Don't glorify pimp culture. And there are a lot of things that we can do to try to cut out the demand side. We focus a lot on the victims, and we should. They deserve our 100% support and help in getting out of the life, but we also cannot ignore the demand side. And so I hope that some of you listening will think through that as well and think through of ways that you can help, maybe on that side of things, in order to help victims. That is part of my legacy. And I'm excited that I did have a small part in helping victims along the way. And I'm excited to have a small part in helping bring awareness to sex trafficking in Alabama, in the United States, as part of my legacy. Thank you for listening to Legacy Her Way. If today's conversation inspired you, moved you, or made you think differently about what legacy means, you're not alone. Be sure to follow the show so that you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling generous, leave a review to help more women find inspiration for their own path to legacy. Until next time, keep building boldly, loving deeply, and living your legacy her way. Goodbye.